Welcome back, everybody. We're here for our last presentation of the Housing Solutions Summit and would like to thank you for sticking around through this last day or so of pretty in-depth housing information. We're really excited this morning to introduce you to Marilyn Crowley from the Michigan Community Capital, which is a community development finance institution that also acts as a nonprofit developer in communities throughout the state. They've done a lot of really great work and have been really innovative in terms of how they've partnered with communities and financed projects. And so we're really looking forward to hearing more from Marilyn about a particular project downstate that looks like it can be a model for other projects throughout Michigan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marilyn and she can go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us this morning, Marilyn.
Thanks, Sarah. Sorry, I should share my screen.
Yes. I'll stop sharing mine.
All right. Thanks for having me. I work for Michigan Community Capital. I'm their Vice President of Investments, which means I run their real estate development arm. MCC is a 501c3 nonprofit. We were actually started as a public-private partnership between MSHA, the MEDC, and what is now called SENER, to try to attract new market tax credits to the state of Michigan, which we have been successful. And then from 2004, we've expanded the scope of what we do. We are a community development finance institution, which means we lend to other people's projects in low-income census tracts. We also, as I mentioned, are a community development entity, which means we apply for new market tax credits. We attract them to the state of Michigan. We're the only CDE that applies for new market tax credits only for the state of Michigan. And we, again, put those credits into other people's projects. So we're trying to, one of our missions is to aggregate private, federal, and state capital and then invest it in the state of Michigan. We have an insurance company, which helps to reduce the cost of insurance for low-income housing projects. And then the last arm, which is what I run, is our equity in real estate. So we focus on projects that for people who make too much money to qualify for LIHTC or Section 8 or something like that. But the housing is not being created in their price point because it's happening just on the high end luxury, and it's happening at the lower end. I see a typo. It's mixed use projects, sorry. And so we call that the missing middle or workforce housing. It's got a lot of different names, but that's our main focus on when we are acting as the developer. So I wanted to start and just talk you through what a typical single family house is costing us these days. And this is all very theoretical, but it's based on some work that we've been doing. So obviously you have legal, you have to study the site, you have to pay an engineer and an architect, you have to acquire the land, you have to pay for insurance and for taxes, you have to pay for the interest on your construction loan, you have to pay the contractor, and you have to pay to connect all the utilities to the site. So we're seeing about a total price per square foot of about $193 per square foot. So on a 1,500 square foot house with a 2-car garage, we're looking at a $300,000 house. This is not a luxury house. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just a new construction house. And that's very, very high. That is, a house like this could have been built 10 years ago for half the price. And so the question is why aren't houses being built in the price point that we need for regular working people? And the answer is it's very expensive right now. And the people who know how to build houses are focusing on markets that they can spend a similar amount, but sell it for way more. So here's an example that I pulled from a new construction in Traverse City. So it's a 2,400 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom. A lot of their costs are the same as the previous example. So your legal's the same, your site inspection, your engineering's the same, your acquisition's the same, insurance, taxes, construction loan. The only difference is that the hard cost is slightly higher because it's a slightly bigger house, probably slightly nicer finishes. And so instead of spending 300,000, you're spending, you know, a little over 400,000. But then you can sell it for way more because that's the market. And so the question is, if you are a builder and you know how to build houses, why would you build a 1,500 square foot house that costs 300 and maybe sell it for, you know, 350, make a $50,000 profit, or do a project that costs you 400,000 and sell it for almost double? And so that's why we're seeing a lot of new construction with these big single family homes in wealthy areas of the state. They're attracting the talent that knows how to do these things. So what do we do about it? First, it's super important that there's community champions around the issue of housing and affordable and attainable housing. The philosophy that the market will work itself out is clearly not been working for us because there's not housing being developed in the price points that we need to serve all of the residents in Michigan. So this is a picture of the Cadillac City Council in 2019. They were very supportive of our project at the Cadillac Lofts. And it would not have happened if the city had not said, we need this in our community. So if your community is still deciding if this is an issue that they need to talk about, then they're behind the ball. The municipalities and community leaders need to be talking about housing, or the problem isn't going to get addressed in their community. So it's really important that you think about housing in this missing middle or attainable housing price point as it needs to be a public-private partnerships. I have a statement in here that there are very few communities in Michigan that just get to have development happen. And so to be proactive in attracting investment in your community is essential. And it requires for the community leaders and community members to be on the same page about what they need in their community. What kind of housing do they need? Are they on the same page that they need housing at all? And that needs to happen before a developer comes to the table. If you have a developer and they have to go through 16 meetings of the council members fighting over if they even agree that this is an issue, then you're going to lose them. And then there's the acceptance that there needs to be commitment on a financial level to get housing in this price point. It's not going to happen on its own. So I'm going to walk us through some steps. And so this is kind of like the overview before I dive into the different steps. So the first step is clearly defining your goals and trying not to solve too many problems at once. I've definitely walked into charrettes where they're trying to solve, you know, wetlands preservation and attainable housing, and they're just adding a lot of things on. So being very clear about this is the price point that we're trying to focus, this is the problem that we're trying to solve, and not trying to solve all the problems in your community in one single project. It puts too much burden on a single project. And understanding that many stakeholders have a certain lens. And so there's a lot of groundwork to build consensus because everybody has their own perspective in what they're trying to achieve. I had a person on a phone call the other day who was an elected official, but also owned property and was trying to spin the conversation to get me to buy their property. And it, you know, understanding that if there are members in your work groups that have a very specific point of view, that's something that you have to work out internally. And then these goals can be for a single specific site, or it can be more general for your whole community. So you can state, we need X amount of housing in this price point, and you can go as far as to say, and we need it in this neighborhood or on this site, or it can be more general that we need it in the community. And then obviously the next step is getting everybody on board. So studying the market data is very powerful when you have a market study that's showing, we need 1,600 new apartments in this price point in the next 5 years. It's very hard to argue that there's not a housing problem. So I definitely encourage, if you're looking at how you start, is to hire a market study the conditions, partner with regional groups that are studying the housing conditions. As I mentioned, if you have a developer and your boards are infighting, there are enough communities who know what they want and will state what they want, and are on the same page, that what makes your community so special that they're going to sit through all of this infighting when the town next door is like, we're on the same page. So that's a super important groundwork to do before development comes, is to build consensus around what you want and what you want to see. And then engaging the public. It is definitely a difficult situation when the council has decided what they want, and then the rest of the community is upset about it, and they're doing that infighting around a single development. If you've been having conversations about the need for housing, what kind of housing, where you want the housing to go, and it's been in the public kind of arena for a while, that when a project actually comes, you'll have likely less frustration and contention about a specific project. Still, this is all before, hopefully, a development kind of presents itself, is looking internally at your community and what the barriers are. Why hasn't this been happening? If you're missing housing, why hasn't it been happening? Is your zoning too restrictive? Are the lots too big? Looking at, can you create more flexibility, smaller lots, smaller units, more density? The way you're able to achieve these lower price points is to do smaller units or do more units in an area. So if your zoning is only allows 1,600 square foot on 5 acres, that you're not going to get housing that's priced below 200,000. So looking at your zoning, looking at the financial reasons. So if you need housing that costs 150,000 and you know that a single family house costs 300,000, there's the financial reason right there. The market isn't going to provide what you need because the market doesn't want to lose money, the private market. Is there available land? Site control is a huge benefit. So if there is municipal, school, any kind of public entity that has site control or can get site control, having a piece of property that you are marketing for a specific use is very powerful. You might not have development happening because there isn't developers in your community, and that's a really challenging issue to try to attract an outside developer. It does happen. We get cold called by communities all the time that say, we want you to come do this in our community. But I do think that there is a significant amount of untapped talent in communities that they just don't know that that could be a project that they're working on. They might be focusing on luxury houses. And so meeting with them, educating them on the tools to make a missing middle project work, trying to cultivate that talent in your own community. If your community has a reputation of being hard to work with, that could be a reason that projects aren't happening. And then conditions of sites. So definitely sites that are contaminated, are along a river, so the ground is unstable, doesn't have public infrastructure to it. Those are all barriers to a project happening on that site. Not insurmountable, but they're just one more roadblock. So the next step would be seeking out partnerships. Building political support is key. So having work sessions, what are the questions that your community leaders have that make them not want to support this. And, providing education and case studies around this topic. There's a lot of talent and resources usually in a community. So talking to bankers, architects, brokers, builders that live in your community and talk about what they are seeing in the market. Are they seeing a pent-up demand for sale? Do they need to see rentals? Do they have ideas? Have you tapped their kind of local talent? Networking, reaching out to other communities that have done similar projects or are working on similar things, joining work groups helps to share ideas. And so, I mean, that's basically what this is. So good job. When you are ready, potentially doing an RFP for development partners. So that's if you have a site, you've done the market study, you know what you want. That's a good time to put out a public document saying, we're looking for development partners. This is super key, and I'm not going to be beat around the bush. If a community is not willing to offer support to projects financially, these projects aren't going to get done. They take an immense amount of public-private partnerships, but it can be very creative on how local units of government and foundations and authorities and those kind of groups support projects financially. It's not necessarily just cash up front. So low acquisition, if you have a city-owned property, it could be a vacant lot, it could be undeveloped land, it could be owned by the school district. There is a lot of opportunities untapped of publicly or semi-publicly owned land that could be given or sold at a very low price to a developer to achieve the goal that you want. And when you own the land, you control the conversation. So you can say, I will give you X amount of acres and you will give me X amount of whatever. And owning the land gives you a lot of power. If you know of groups that need space, need the housing, they can pre-buy, pre-lease, having actual users identified at the front end helps to attract investment. Definitely, if I get a call and they say, oh, I have a tenant for you, I'm much more interested than just kind of build it and they will come mentality. If you don't have any money and you're not a public official, you can still support projects by going to public meetings, talking about this issue, supporting the discussion. And then, when possible, using economic development tools like brownfield tax increment financing, like tax abatements, like helping to provide money for connecting to infrastructure. Those are all ways that projects can be supported financially. So it can be very creative. So I'm going to talk about a project that is under construction. We actually have 3 home sales, the first 3, 13, 14, and 15 here at the end. We've got move-ins next month, which is very exciting and scary. It started in April of this year, and it is an $8 million development. It's creating 30 for sale new construction homes. It's a subdivision through a condominium, so it's not platted because this is too many units for us to have platted for this amount of space. And it is a strong, strong public-private partnership. So who was involved in this project? Michigan Community Capital. So my group was the developer. We put the financing together. We guaranteed the debt. Housing Next was a county-wide nonprofit that really, in my mind, paved the way. They did a lot of this partnership building before we even got to the table. So they commissioned a housing study. They helped to identify sites. They helped to introduce us to the city. They encouraged proactive zoning. So they did a lot of groundwork before we even showed up. The Grand Haven Area Community Foundation did a PRI investment. So they're loaning us money at a low cost, and then we will pay them back. And that just helps with the raising money. It helps not having to borrow as much money from the bank and it reduces our cost of capital because it's a lower interest rate than a bank. The property was owned by the city of Grand Haven. They had owned it for like 70 years or since the 70s or something. And so the land bank was involved because we needed to use brownfield tax increment financing to help pay for the infrastructure, but it wasn't contaminated. So we moved it into the land bank to open up that eligibility, and then the land bank transferred it to us. The city of Grand Haven is, to me, almost an equal partner. I mean, they didn't put in that much money, they didn't design the houses, but they have been aggressively proactive in partnering with us. They updated their zoning to allow for smaller houses and smaller lots. They sold us the property for $32,000. I don't know what the market rate is for 7.5 acres in the city of Grand Haven, but it is a lot more than $32,000. They approved a 30-year brownfield tax increment financing plan that basically uses the new taxes generated to pay us for the cost of the public infrastructure, so that we don't have to spend, we don't have to pass the cost of the public infrastructure to the buyers. So they're only paying for the cost of their house and not for the cost of the infrastructure, because their taxes are paying over time. And I will get into that, I believe. So sorry, I jumped ahead. They also reduced their tap fees. Their tap fees were $10,000 per house, and they reduced it to $1,000 a house. So that was a big savings. And then they created a community land trust, which is, I will explain later in the presentation. Bank is doing our construction loan, and they actually are doing the majority of the end mortgage loans for the community land trust homes. And then we found a local broker who reduced their commission to 1%. So they're working for less than they typically would to help us put this project together, which helps us save money. A tap fee is the cost to connect into the municipal water sewer system. So when you put in your sewer line and you're connecting a house, usually you have to pay a fee, and their fee was $10,000, and they dropped it. Thank you for that question. Sorry, I've got chats, I've got Q&As. I'll come back to the appraisal gap, or later, you can help me come back to it. So this is out of the Housing Next study. And this was very powerful for me as a developer. Houses priced between 150 and 250, they needed 1,600 new units between 2017 and 2022. That's a lot. And that made me feel like I can build 30 houses and they will sell if I price them in this price point. So this study was very powerful, both for getting me to come to the community and doing a project, but also getting the local leaders on board to say, this is a problem, we need this, and to be active about the situation. So these are the 3 house types that we're building in Robinson Landing, which is the name of the development. There's 30 houses, 16 will be priced affordable at 80% AMI, the area median income, and they will be in a community land trust. So the community land trust, which is was created by the city of Grand Haven, will own the land, and the buyers will buy those houses and own them and have a mortgage, but there will be restrictions on how they resell them. So they can only sell them at a certain inflation. It's a calculation, and they can only sell them to buyers that are also 80% of the area median income. And we did that because these are being sold well below the market value. And so we wanted protection so that somebody didn't buy it and the next day sell it for $100,000 more. This is a mixed income neighborhood. So 14 of the houses will be kind of regular houses. They'll buy the land, they'll buy the house. It's a market rate house, and they'll be able to sell it to whoever they want for however much they can in the future. And they're cute little houses. One aspect that we focused on is doing affordable by design. So we're not building mansions and then selling them for a lot less. We're building pretty modest homes on pretty modest lots. So the houses are between 950 and 1,450 square feet. They are slab on grade, stick built construction, so they're not modular. They're wood frame permanent homes, but they don't have basements. Basements added about $40,000 per house, and we love basements, but the goal was to create housing at an accessible price point and not necessarily to create basements. So how do we get to that price point? We had to cut. We cut basements, we cut garages. So they can add on garages if they want to, if they have the ability to afford, but garages cost $35,000. So if we had done a basement and a garage, that would have been almost $80,000 more that we would have had to charge for these little houses. So we took the philosophy that someone over time could add a garage if they would like, as an upgrade to their house. We definitely focused our dollars on quality construction inside the house. So all the appliances are Energy Star, and they are included in the purchase price, which is very rare for new construction. Typically, it doesn't come with any appliances. So a new homeowner, especially one that's a lower income, would buy a house and then they'd have to go find $5,000 to put in appliances. And that's not the case here. It comes fully ready to go. You know, they can start living there the day they move in. We're pursuing a Green Star certification because we've used such high quality windows and insulation. We believe these are very energy efficient and will score well for that certification. The roof has a lifetime warranty. The windows have a 20-year warranty. The siding has a 10-year warranty. And so we really picked materials that are going to be beneficial to the owner long-term and not just, you know, cheap and fall apart in 10 years. And we will be doing grass seeding and a small amount of landscaping as well as street trees in the spring. So that's not an additional, often new construction, they just get the lot and it's all undeveloped. We're going to at least, you know, provide a small amount of landscaping so they don't have to do that investment upfront. So this is a little bit more information on the Community Land Trust. It was started by the City of Grand Haven and staffed by the City of Grand Haven. I think they're called like the Neighborhood Support Department or something, but they help with home buyer counseling and that kind of thing already. So this was just an additional job description to their staff. They started a board made up of local stakeholders to oversee the CLT, which is a nonprofit. And once a house is done and ready to be sold, we will deed the land to the Community Land Trust and we will deed the house to the buyer. And then the Community Land Trust will enter into a ground lease with the home buyer for $30 a month. And the only point of that mechanism is to be able to control who the next owner is. So they can't just sell their house to whoever they want. They can't rent it out. They can't be landlords. It's the purpose of that house is to be owner occupied for an 80% of the area median income buyer. And they are required to go through home buyer education and counseling and that kind of thing. The houses in the Community Land Trust are the same exact design as the houses that are market rate. So it's not like we're building nice houses for the market rate and then cheap houses for the Community Land Trust. They all look the same, just the Community Land Trust homes don't own the property, the ground. So this is how the City of Grand Haven contributed financially. They reduced their acquisition price, they reduced their tap fees, and the Grand Haven Area Community Foundation approved a low interest loan, which saved about $50,000 in interest and fees. The city's contribution saved about $270,000 to the project. So if you start adding up these costs, those are more and more costs that we would have to add to the price of the home in order to break even. Anything that you can take away from the cost to the developer ultimately should pass through as a cost savings to the end buyer. A big way that the city contributed was the brownfield tax increment financing. This is a little summary of how you qualify to be eligible for brownfield tax increment financing. Either it needs to be contaminated, functionally obsolete, blighted, or historic. And so there's a line in the act that says if it is owned by a land bank, then it is automatically qualified as blighted. And so that's how we qualified the project. I alluded to that earlier. I kind of got ahead of myself. And so if the land bank owns the property, it also opens up additional eligible activities that have typically been reserved for core communities. So infrastructure improvements and site prep are the two areas that we accessed for this project. And I'll go further into that. Here's the location. It's in the city of Grand Haven, right on the edge. So the way we did this is the city of Grand Haven deeded the project to the Ottawa County Land Bank. The Grand Haven Brownfield Redevelopment Authority approved the Brownfield plan while the land bank owned the property, and then they transferred the property to the LLC that's doing the project, which is 100% owned by Michigan Community Capital. These are the eligible costs. This is a local only plan, which means it did not go to Eagle or the MEDC for approval. There was 1.7 million in eligible activities. And then they approved interest, which is really important because MCC is having to borrow money to pay for these costs up front, and we pay interest on that. So over a 30-year period, we need to cover not only the cost, the original cost, but the cost of the interest to bridge that money for 30 years. So the total plan was almost $3 million, and it generated $175,000 to go back to the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, and then another $362,000 to go to the local Brownfield Revolving Fund. So it's reimbursing us as the developer, but also reimbursing these other economic development groups so they can continue doing more projects in their community. So a little 101 on how we use the brownfield to fill the gap. So before the project started, the taxes were zero because it was owned by the city. But if it wasn't owned by the city and it was owned by some private entity, there would be some amount of taxes being paid. And that would continue to be paid with a brownfield plan. The increase or the investment onto the project that's creating new taxes is what's being eligible to be reimbursed. And so we are providing the money upfront to cover those costs and then being reimbursed each year using the new taxes created. This is just the project sources and uses, showing how we paid for the project and what we spent money on. So in summary, housing in this price point, if it's under 300,000, if it's under, anything close to 300,000 will not be addressed by the private market, because the private market is looking to make as much profit as they can, unless it's a philanthropically minded private developer. And so it's important to think about that working and middle-class families need subsidy. The times have changed, and the houses that were being built in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s are not serving middle-class families. They're not being built, and they need support and encouragement from local communities. So economic development professionals, planners, city officials, and even businesses need to be proactive to encourage housing to meet their needs of kind of normal working and middle-class people. And so the best way to do that is identifying sites and completing market studies and raising capital to attract investment, and getting brownfield redevelopment authorities, municipalities, and land banks on the same page and working together to be able to leverage the tools that they have in order to encourage this kind of housing. And that's the end. So I know I went through that really fast. So let me know if you have any questions, and I can go back and re-explain something. I'm an open book, so let me know what questions you may have.
Thank you, Marilyn. That was I think, a really great case study, and a great way to bring together a lot of the concepts that we talked about over the last day or so, particularly around brownfield and TIF. That was a pretty major part of the content for the last couple of sessions. So there is a question in the chat from Craig, and it refers to the appraisal gap that we talked about yesterday in our discussion on the Land Bank Authority. And I think you can see the question here in chat regarding the construction of a new home costing $195,000 and selling for $164,000. So how do communities work with the land bank to develop housing and address that appraisal gap?
Yeah, so we're doing this exact issue. We're working on this in Flint right now. So the land bank owns the property, and it's going to cost us $316,000 in Flint to build a single family home there, and it will only be worth like $180,000 when it's finished. So why would you do that? Well, we're doing it because we're a mission-driven organization, and we're trying to encourage new investment and stabilize the neighborhoods. So the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority is approving a brownfield plan to reimburse the difference between the cost to construct and the sale price. So they're using that same concept of new taxes generated will go to pay the developer back. So we don't get paid the full gap at the time of close when the house sells. We get our 180 at the time the house sells, and then we make up the difference over a 30-year period. So that's how we're addressing it. It's, I think, not ideal, and there needs to be other tools developed around that, but that's how we're trying to make it work right now.
And have there been discussions in your work on using things like ARPA dollars and local funds for filling some of that appraisal gap?
Definitely. I think that's an important tool. We haven't gotten, 100% definition around that, but I definitely think we've been advocating that some money that's coming go to funds that can help cover the gap between cost to construct and the market appraisal.
Okay, thank you. A question from Anne. On any of the projects that you're involved with, are any of the houses being constructed as modular homes, or are they all traditional stick-built homes?
So we've looked into modular. We didn't find significant cost savings. The biggest boast about modular that we have seen is that they go up faster, which is great. Ultimately, we didn't have the control over the level of quality and the type of build out of the houses that we wanted. And the cost savings was not enough to justify yet. Also, the trades still have to come to the site and connect everything. You still need the drywallers to come and kind of put stuff together. You still need electricians and plumbers to come and plug it into the site. And we found that they were charging like an upcharge because their scope was like the price that they were spending on that amount of time was more per hour than if they were just building out the whole thing. Because with 30 houses, we were providing them consistent work, for 18 months. So we studied it. At this time, we didn't see a significant savings. And with the panelized framing, we we saved a lot of time in construction. As I mentioned, we started construction in April. We're delivering houses in January. So it really wasn't a very long construction period. So long story short, we've looked into it. We think it is a good option in a lot of communities, but it didn't make sense for us on this project.
Okay, thank you. We have another question about why you chose to build middle income housing versus lower income housing, with the need numbers being reasonably the same. What were some of the factors in that decision? There's a comment about looking for advocacy help for the $800 rent range, understanding that there's an even bigger gap for lower income households in terms of construction costs.
Yeah, so we just as an organization focus on middle income housing. There's a lot of groups that focused on low income housing. There's LIHTC developers, there's Habitat for Humanities. And as an organization, we just feel that missing middle workforce housing is kind of vacant. So we wanted to be in that area. Definitely lower income housing is extremely important. So, we're not saying that what we're doing is more important. It's just kind of the lane that we've decided to work in. And you're absolutely right. The lower price point, the lower rent, the harder that this becomes. I will say one thing about the Robinson Landing project is because we're doing mixed income, we're losing money on some of the houses and we're making money on some of the houses. So if we were to have done all of the houses priced between 130 and 180, we would have had a gap and we would have needed more money. So because we're doing some market rate houses, that almost offsets the cost of the lower income houses. And so I think doing a mixed income development is a good model, because you're still making some money that can help offset your losses.
Okay, thank you. That's I think a great technique. And I would just add, based on some of the conversation that we had yesterday in a couple of the webinars, when we talk about where to focus some of the discussion on this, it is, there is an issue in terms of affordability thresholds for lower income households. And we have a situation across most of the state where there's a big chunk of people who are falling through the cracks because they earn too much to qualify for low income housing, but they don't earn enough to afford the going rent or the home prices in the market right now. So I think it's really important to create new tools for those income levels, just because they don't really exist right now, and there's a lot of people struggling. Just a couple questions on the development specifically. First, if you could answer this quick question about what a tap fee is, and also what the makeup of the surrounding neighborhood is for your project.
A tap fee is the cost to connect into municipal water and sewer. And the question about the surrounding neighborhood, you mean like the properties around the development? Okay. To the north is an undeveloped blueberry field that is in the township and is being looked at by Eastbrook Homes, which is a market rate developer, to do 250 homes, but they're fighting about density right now. To the east is a single family neighborhood. To the south is a set of properties that are single family homes facing out to Comstock. And to the west is a light industrial park. So definitely we focused on that side of the development. We strategically put the road coming along there so that there's not houses right next with their backyards to the industrial park. And we did a significant amount of extra landscaping and fencing to buffer, but it's not like heavy manufacturing. So that's the kind of layout of the area, housing and light industrial.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here. I'll do my best to ask this question. I'm not sure I'll get this right, but how is the interest from buyers on this mixed income project in the community, particularly with some of the properties still being owned by the land bank? And has that caused any pushback or delay in sales?
So the properties are owned by the land trust, which is different from the land bank, which is very confusing. So the land trust is who is owning the land of the 80% AMI homes. No need to apologize. There's lots of land stuff happening. We have 17 of the 30 houses sold. So all but one of the CLT houses have been sold. So we've sold 15 of the community land trust and 2 market rate. My feedback from my realtor is that when you're spending, 230, 280 on a market rate house, you want to drive up to it, you want to walk through it. And so that's been the feedback of why the market rate houses aren't selling as fast. They have more options. They're looking in the whole surrounding area. They can potentially afford new construction, being done in the township. So we're competing a bit on the market rate. And then once the actual houses are developed, our broker feels like once they can walk through that they'll sell. So because all of these have been being sold sight unseen, we haven't even been letting people drive through the neighborhood because we just put our road in last week. So we haven't gotten much pushback at all. There's been some misinformation that these are for like poor people. And we're like, these are still $180,000 houses. I mean, they're people who make 50, 60,000. They're still working people. So there's been misinformation, certainly, that we've been working on the messaging around. And then the real estate community has been very salty about this 1% brokerage fee. So we've been getting some feedback that the realtors have been saying, oh, you don't want to buy there because they want their full 3% instead of their 1%. So I'm not worried about it. It's only 14 market rate houses. And I think they will sell because they're nice houses and they're well constructed. And I think the neighborhood will be desirable with sidewalks and a cul-de-sac and all of that in the city of Grand Haven. But there has been, some drama around doing a concept like this. So it's just kind of constantly educating.
You're breaking a lot of new ground there, so I guess that's understandable, but we appreciate you kind of paving the way for a model like this. Question on co-op housing. Have you dabbled in that for sales and ownership? Understanding that this is a technique for multifamily housing in some communities like Lansing.
We haven't yet gone into that model. This is our first for sale project. So we definitely are interested in other techniques like cooperative ownership, like being able to let community members invest in a project and get a return. We just haven't gotten there yet. We've only been doing development for 3 years now, so we have a lot still to do.
I can't believe it's only 3 years. So there's a comment here from Craig about being kind of overtaxed in terms of capacity as we consider using these tools. I think we have a lot of really proactive community leaders who understand the tools that are out there, really want to see opportunities to apply them, but just having the capacity and having the developer that can actually put it all together is a really important piece. And I just want to say that Michigan Community Capital has been a really incredible resource for communities all over the state, including many of the communities that I've worked with in the past. And just wish there were more Marylands out there to help walk us through the process, because it does oftentimes just take a central person to bring it all together and put these pieces together. So I don't know if you have anything to add, Marilyn, but I know, like I said, you've done a lot of groundbreaking kinds of work, and just wish there were. Just wish there was more capacity to do this kind of thing.
We're working on it. I mean, we're working on trying to leverage more capacity building funding so we can hire more people. I think my long-term goal is to be more of like a advising role and not having MCC doing all the projects. The issue with us doing the projects is they're so capital intensive. We had to raise $8 million to do this project. Just one project, 130 house project was $8 million. And you know, we're growing, but we're a newer organization doing real estate. And we are definitely limited by the amount of capital that we can raise in a single year. So, you know, I think we're pointed in the right direction and we're doing work that people want us to be doing. And I just hope to us be able to grow, to expand, to encourage other groups to form similar to Michigan Community Capital. I mean, we are making $0 on this project. And so that creates a sustainability issue. If we're not making money, it's great because we're doing a mission-driven work, but you know, how do we pay for ourselves? How do we hire more staff? So that's definitely something that we are talking about all the time is how do we grow? How do we have a sustainable business model? So I'm excited. I love what we do. I love that we're cover the whole state. And I love teaching other people how to do what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Well, we really appreciate it. This has been a really great opportunity to learn more about how this stuff actually works on the ground. One more question for you. When you choose a site to build on, when there are underdeveloped sites in the community and surplus property on the outskirts of town that are considered greenfield, how would you make the case for infill over greenfield development?
That's a great question. I always prefer infill over greenfield. Site control is a huge deal. So in this circumstance, this was the site that was available, and at least it was in the city and we could connect to municipal, water, sewer. And it's surrounded by development on all sides. So my justification in my head was this at least isn't like sprawl way over there. It's at least in the city. I would, if there is site control in an infill site, that is preferable. They're, I think, harder to do in that there's often kind of baggage with the site. Did somebody demo a basement into the site and you have to dig out the basement? Is the site contaminated? And those are all things that are barriers to overcome. And so making sure you're using the tools that are available, like brownfield tax increment financing, or like a reduced acquisition price. That's a way to encourage investment as an infill project. So our project in Flint we're doing is a scattered site. It's 3 different lots owned by the land bank, but they're all within the same neighborhood. So I think that's a good example. And the motivation for us doing that project was site control. The land bank was like, we have these lots, we want to do this. Here you go. Here's I think we're paying $250 per lot or something. So yeah, I'm always pro infill if it's possible.
I think that gets to Craig's question about whether you need a big chunk of land or if you can take advantage of opportunities from properties that are coming through the foreclosure process or demolition of blight. So it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing in Flint, and gets to some of the opportunities we heard about with the Land Bank Authority yesterday. So that's another great example we'll be keeping an eye on. So
yeah, that one is only 6 units. So that one is 2 single families and then 2 duplexes across the street. There is some economies of scale. If you're paying a site supervisor to come and oversee your project, it helps to have enough work so that you're not spending so much money on this, site supervisor. And so we felt like 6 units was like a good number. I'd say 10 would be a little bit better, but if you are working with a builder who doesn't have a site supervisor and they can do a house by house, then I still think that's a great model to be pursuing.
mm-hmm. Ann asked in the Flint project, who's acting as the project manager, Michigan Community Capital or the Land Bank?
MCC, in partnership with a Flint-based nonprofit called Uptown Redevelopment Corporation, we formed 50-50 partnership. So the two of us are being the project manager. We're putting the financing together. We're hired the architect. We are working through site plan approval, that kind of thing. The land bank basically has just been a facilitator. So they have given us a purchase agreement for this property and they've been publicly supportive. But other than that, they haven't put any money in or, hired anybody to do anything.
Okay, thank you.